When Russia's invasion of Ukraine began in February, Moscow seemed confident. They thought it would be quick, that Kyiv would fall in 72 hours. But 6 months later, the Ukrainian capital is still standing. In fact, the war is now entering a new phase. Ukraine has dealt a big blow to Russia in the east, a fast-moving offensive which saw them capture crucial cities and settlements. The counterattack began in the final days of August. It was first focused on the southern region of Kherson. But just as Moscow redirected attention and troops there, Ukraine launched another highly effective offensive in the northeast. This time, the target was Kharkiv. Ukrainian forces launched a lightning-fast offensive. Their rapid advance exposed the extraordinary collapse of the Russian defense. For 5 months, they were holding on to the Kharkiv region. But this weekend, Moscow was scrambling to keep it. Town after town were retaken in the region. And soon, all eyes were on Izium, Moscow's main bastion in northeastern Ukraine. Russian forces used it as a logistics base, especially for their months-long assault in Donbas region. But on Saturday, Russian forces were forced to flee this strategic city. Soon the Ukrainian flag was fluttering again in Izium, a feat that was lauded by President Volodymyr Zelensky.
All those who defended Mariupol and Azovstal, liberated Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy regions, Bucha, Irpin, Bordyanka, and now Balaklia, Izium and Kupiansk.
In Kherson, too, a similar scene is unfolding. Ukraine says Russian units are negotiating a surrender. They are laying down their arms or attempting to retreat back to Russian lines. So Kharkiv, and now maybe Kherson, I know that sounds like a lot of territory that Kyiv has regained. So let's pull a map to understand this better. The territories marked in blue are the ones that Ukraine has retaken. Blue. Those in red are still under Russian control. Red. Ukraine says it has regained control over 3,000 square kilometers in the last few days. And as you can see, these regions, Severodonetsk, Luhansk, Donetsk, and Mariupol. Now, according to Moscow, Ukrainian forces outnumbered Russians by 8-1. Well, we cannot verify the numbers for now. These could be a potential breakthrough in the war. As for the locals, most of them celebrated the Ukrainian offensive. Some greeted the military outside their houses and homes. Others, like this Ukrainian mayor on your screen, ripped up the Russian flag. But the joy was short-lived. Russia says its forces are conducting airstrikes. It was also accused of targeting civilian infrastructure as revenge. Missile strikes caused power cuts across the region, affecting millions of people in Kharkiv and surrounding regions. But even then, the Russian setbacks are significant right now. In fact, they were so significant that Putin loyalist Ramzan Kadyrov criticized the army's performance. Kadyrov is the Kremlin-appointed leader of Chechnya. He says the army has made mistakes in Ukraine and even suggested that Putin might not be aware of the real state of affairs. Kadyrov has always been hyper-loyal to Moscow, but this rare criticism suggests that even the Chechen leader is worried. Currently, all eyes on the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Just days ago, he told the Russian public that Moscow has lost nothing in this war, but the losses of the last few days could be difficult to cover. The recent debacle has provoked outrage among Russian military bloggers and even patriotic commentators. They slammed the Kremlin for failing to mobilize more forces and take strong action against Ukraine. For now, the Kremlin says Russia will achieve its military goals in Ukraine. As for Kyiv, it is pushing on with its offensive, trying to regain more and more territories. After 200 days, will this be the offensive that changes the tide of the war? Only time will tell. Well, as you know, when Russia's invasion of Ukraine began in February, Moscow seemed very confident. They thought that it would be a quick one, that Kyiv would fall in 72 hours. But 6 months later, the Ukrainian capital is still standing. We're asking the question, where is this war headed, and does Ukraine have the reason to celebrate now that they are capturing some of these territories from the Russian forces? In fact, the war is now entering a new phase. Ukraine has dealt a big blow to Russia in the east, a fast-moving offensive which saw them capture crucial cities and also settlements. According to the Ukrainian forces, they say they've captured over 3,000 square kilometers of land in Ukraine. The counterattack began in the final days of August. It was first focused on the southern region of Kherson, but just as Moscow redirected attention and troops there, Ukraine launched another highly effective offensive in the northeast. This time, the target was Kharkiv. Ukrainian forces launched a lightning-fast offensive. Their rapid advance exposed the extraordinary collapse of the Russian defense. Now, for 5 months, they were holding on to the Kharkiv region, but this weekend, Moscow was scrambling to keep it. Towns after towns, they were all retaken in the region. And soon, all eyes are now on a region called Izium, Moscow's main bastion in northeastern Ukraine. Russian forces used it as a logistics base, especially for their months-long assault in Donbas region. But on Saturday, Russian forces were forced to flee the strategic city. Soon, the Ukrainian flag was fluttering again in this city called Izium, a feat that was lauded by President Volodymyr Zelensky as well. And in Kherson, too, a similar scene is unfolding. Ukraine says Russian units are negotiating a surrender. Joining us now from Virginia is Danny Davis. He's the Defense Priorities Senior Fellow and Military Expert. Danny, welcome to Fineprint.
Thanks for having me.
What do you think may be causing the Russians to retreat? And is there any reason for Ukraine to celebrate, or they need much more time?
Well, there's no question that this is a tremendous victory for Ukraine. We just do have to keep in mind kind of the context here, and it's so far a significant tactical victory, but it certainly doesn't indicate that the war is anywhere near being over, because the progress that Ukraine has made has been, I think somewhere around 50 to 60 linear kilometers toward the east. And so Russia has been driven back, but they've only been driven back partial of the ways, and there's still a lot of fighting to go on. But really, there's no way you can say anything besides this is a tremendous success for Ukraine. Really the first one since, I guess, March, when they forced Russia to leave north of Kiev. But this in some ways is even bigger than that, because the Russians were not prepared for it. They were completely caught by surprise, and they have suffered some fairly significant casualties as they have moved out.
Danny, when we say that there's a potential breakthrough in this war, who takes the credit, Ukraine or Russia?
Well, see, I don't think there's been a breakthrough yet. This has been a tactical move, and this doesn't signal the war is coming to an end any more than it did when Ukraine was driven out of Mariupol and then Severodonetsk and then Lysychansk. Those were all big hits against Ukraine, but they stiffened up, and then they have launched a counterattack. We can expect almost certainly the same thing is going to happen with Russia. Once they have absorbed this hit, they're now forming new lines, and then I would almost certainly guess within the coming weeks they'll launch their own counterattack. But the fact is, they still have somewhere around 20% of Ukrainian territory, and there's a long way to go before this thing's over, I'm afraid.
Danny, finally, after months of the war and various developments coming in from Ukraine and also Russia, where do you think this war is headed? And do you think it will change the tide?
Well, I think the next big thing to watch for is what's going to happen in the winter. I think probably Russia is going to solidify their lines. I doubt that Ukraine has much striking power left to continue to move farther east in the Kharkov region. And as you may know, in their Kherson offensive about at the end of August, 1st of September, that was a pretty significant failure. They lost a lot of troops and didn't gain much territory at all. Russia handled that one well. But as we get into the fall and then into the winter, there's going to be some real problems with energy in Europe, and with the cost of living going up and the problems on the economy of Europe as a result of the sanctions on Russia, on their gas and oil. And the question is going to come, can the West maintain its stability and its uniform support of Ukraine? Or does the cost start to cause some of the populations in the West to say, hey, we're not going to pay a price for this and demand some kind of change from their government? Right now, we don't know. The governments are all saying we're going to be firm and we're not going to change our support. But that remains to be seen when the price comes in the winter.
Live from Virginia, Donnie Davis, thank you very much for giving us time and for talking to WION today. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.